Good morning, everybody. Good morning, online folks who start watching on Zoom before they get on Zoom or start watching on YouTube. So this morning, Chairman Zwanitzer is running late. He is stuck in the weather, unfortunately, but he will hopefully be here by the time we end with public testimony. He's already presented his bill, so we will move straight into public testimony after we take the roll call. So roll call, please, Marilyn.
Good morning. Representative Chadwick. Representative Klauston. Here. Representative Hornock.
Here.
Representative O'Hearn.
Here.
Representative Penn.
Here.
Representative Trujillo.
Here.
Representative Ward.
Here.
Chairman Yin.
Here. And Chairman Zwanitzer is excused.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, Representative Zwanitzer has already presented his bill at his last meeting. What I'd like to see is just in case I need to start rationing the amount of time, how many people are intending to testify on House Bill 149, Protection of Healthcare Workers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And so then we won't have a time limit yet. If the room starts filling in for whatever reason, then we might start introducing a time limit. But for now, we'll just take people as they come. Happy to start with the Hospital Association if they'd like. Oh, yes.
I'm
Representative
sorry,
Ward.
when I try to go to the Zoom link, it says you cannot register for this webinar. The webinar has ended. I'm concerned that some people might be trying to get in there and can't.
No,
So
Chairman, no, it does some odd things. So on the testify one, they can't register, but go ahead.
So if they have already signed up to testify, they should be able to have a link already that works. I think the website might automatically cut off the form once we've started the meeting. So are there folks that wanted to testify beforehand? And I can send you a link personally just to make sure that you can get in, Representative Ward. Yeah, and so that's a good note for everyone in the future. Just make sure if you are planning to testify on a bill, make sure you sign up before the meeting starts. Online. For folks that are in the room, you're always welcome in the room. And so please, Hospital Association, please feel free to start it off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Josh Hannes with the Wyoming Hospital Association. Just a few thoughts and to kind of go back a little bit. This was an interim topic that was examined by the Judiciary Committee and ultimately rejected at their last meeting and came back as a private bill. But I think as Chairman Zwanitzer spoke about last week, this isn't a new effort. There was a bill in 2013 that did make it through. I believe it made it through the Senate and then ultimately failed in the House on the House floor. And this is an issue that our members and our nurses continue to bring back to us during interim periods. As was pointed out last week, Wyoming's one of the only states, if not the only state, without a specific law on the books, particularly for a vulnerable population. And as, again, I don't want to repeat too much information that you already have. And during the interim, and I don't know if the committee has this, but LSO did a pretty wonderful memo really explaining some of the laws in other states and how they work and penalties attached and so on and so forth. Some of them are quite new, Wisconsin and Louisiana, which is what we've looked at closely as what we think are solid models. Louisiana particularly because there's a criminal side, but then there's also requirements on providers to participate, right? So how can we educate and train and help prevent safety or create safety in our facilities? But would like to explain really the scope of the issue. And so, like I said, healthcare workers, social service workers are 5 to 6 times more likely to experience violence in the workplace than any other profession. And Press Ganey earlier this year put out an interesting statistic. So what they found was that there were 5,000 nurses assaulted on the job in the second quarter of 2022. And the breakdown is interesting. So that's 2 nurses an hour, or I'm sorry, this was nurses, not all healthcare workers. So 2 nurses an hour, 51 a day, and a little over 1,700 a month. So this is not acceptable, but it's also not new. This has been going on quite a while. And so what we're asking for is for the law in Wyoming to recognize that this is a different kind of assault. So there are certainly laws on the books. There's penalties for that. But I think that the law recognizes for corrections officers, for example, that it's a different kind of assault. And Mr. Chairman, you might remember from the interim, you served on judiciary, but if I could maybe use a hypothetical to sort of explain the point. So if you come into my office and you assault me, you know, I can call the police, I can go home, you know, maybe I miss work, maybe I even need, excuse me, maybe I even need to receive treatment. But if you assault a nurse, the damage extends beyond the assault to that person. So that nurse is taken off the floor. She's not caring for the patient in front of her or any other patients that they'd be seeing that day throughout the facility. And we know nurses don't grow on trees. We already have a problem staffing our facilities with healthcare workers. So we are creating harm. It's not just the person that was injured, but those people that that nurse or that healthcare provider is supposed to be caring for. In my situation, if that happened to me, I could also tell that person, or we can make sure that person never enters my office again. A person that assaults a healthcare worker can come back the very next day and be treated in that person's office. And that provider might have to see that person again, even if there's an ability for another provider to provide the care. There's a, and I don't want to speak for any nurses, I'm not a nurse, I'm not a clinician, but if somebody beats me up and then is allowed back in my office, I don't really know, that probably doesn't feel really good. So I think the law should recognize that this is a different type of offense. It's not the same as assaulting me or anybody else. And I think this was mentioned last week, is that I think nurses and other providers are looking for, it's a national market, they can go wherever they want. And so they're looking at all of these things, and does the state of Wyoming understand and appreciate and respect the vulnerability that our providers have in facilities? So, you know, we're here today to support this bill. We hope it goes through. And there's things that that we have to do, right? So we have to provide education, provide training. There's requirements for us to report so we can collect data and understand the situation better. So I think this is a good compromise, because what we initially came with was an ask for felony penalties. Now that's included on subsequent offenses in this language, and we think that's a good compromise. This is what nurses and hospitals have been asking for, and I would stand for any questions.
Are there any questions for the Hospital Association? Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, so you said this failed in judiciary. What was the reason that that happened? Why did it stall in judiciary?
Mr. Hannis, if you know, otherwise I can fill in.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornock. I certainly don't want to speak for the decision-making of any of those individuals. The pushback that we heard in committee was, one was some heartburn over felony penalties, which I think is being addressed here as a good compromise. But as Mr. Chairman was on that committee, but he could maybe speak to his own decision.
So Representative Hornock, it was a 5-4 vote in judiciary, which is probably the reason Representative Zwanitzer is bringing it back. I think the issue that the Judiciary Committee was wrangling with was mostly the felony penalty, especially considering we had some similar bills that day that also dealt with felony penalties that also died on a close vote. So it felt maybe a little incongruent to approve one felony. Even though the crimes were very different, it felt incongruent, I think, for some of the members to vote differently on those two bills. Representative Hornock, please.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the explanation, Mr. Chairman. Another follow-up question. You mentioned that 49 other states have this law in place. Is it this strict, or, I mean, I imagine it runs the gamut. Can you go into a little bit of detail on the various options that other states have done?
Mr. Hannis.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornock. It does run the gamut. It runs from felony penalties or potential felony penalties for a first offense, through sort of what's being asked for here, which is similar penalties for assault, but carving it out as a different kind of offense and recognizing the difference in the damage done when assaulting a healthcare worker. Again, I would reference the LSO memo that was done over the interim that does a pretty solid deep dive into a number of states and the way their policy works.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Chairman. Do you know, in reference to the bills in the other states, do they include what, a lot of what this bill is regulations on what the hospitals have to do to comply? Do those other bills include that? Because for those who have read the bill, this bill is 13 pages long. When we're talking about the penalties, that only includes up to page 5. The remainder of that is regulations on clinics and facilities. So could you speak to maybe what might be included in other states?
Mr. Hannis.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Penn, sure. So I believe a lot of the other things you're mentioning come more from the Louisiana model than other states. That one seemed to us the most comprehensive because it wasn't just a criminal penalty with enhanced consequences. Now we have offered or could offer some amendments to some of those things, right? So we understand there could be a burden on smaller facilities in complying with some of these things. We're happy to work through those and make it, we don't want to overburden any clinics that for whatever reason couldn't comply or would be overly burdensome. That could be by type of facility. I understand the Department of Health doesn't license every type of healthcare facility. I heard that testimony last week. We don't think it takes away from the value of this bill because the criminal piece would still apply in my reading of this to all facilities. So they would have the same protection under the law in those clinics. And then I guess I would also offer too, as it relates to notice posting and education and training, if there's a role for the hospital association to assist facilities in finding materials and resources, implementing projects, being directed to other resources, we're happy to play a supportive role.
Representative Trujillo.
Thank you. Do you happen to have a breakdown on who was doing the assaults? Like, is it 60% patients, 20% spouses? Do you have a breakdown on that?
Please, Mr. Hannis.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Trujillo. I don't. In talking with our members, and it varies by facility, certainly. I think what we're seeing is it's mostly patients and partners of those patients. There's some extreme examples of that, unfortunately. And I think as was testified to last time and seems to be consistent across our members is that about 25% to a third of these attacks are done with patients suffering from some sort of mental or behavioral issue, but 3/4 of them are not in that category. We can try to find some additional information for you, but I think part of what this bill is attempting to do is help create some better data collection around the types of attacks, who is perpetrating these attacks, and then we'll have better information to implement better plans to create safer facilities.
Any follow-up, Representative? Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering if maybe it had been considered, schools have often a police officer that resides or is stationed inside the school. So instead of creating onerous new regulations for hospitals and even small healthcare clinics, might it be possible to have a police officer present at all times instead of this new rule or new law?
Mr. Hannis.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ward. So a number of our facilities have varying levels of security. We have 1 and maybe 2 that have police presence in their facilities. Others have nothing at all for a variety of reasons, size, resources, whatever. I don't know that that necessarily solves the problem. What our members are saying that even have that presence is that it's nice to have to de-escalate situations sort of once they've happened, but they haven't, and again, this is anecdotal, but they haven't prevented additional attacks. And we've seen attacks on the rise the last couple of years in all our facilities.
Follow up, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill says the Department of Health shall promulgate all necessary rules. It makes me nervous when departments, not the legislature, are promulgating rules. Do we know what those rules might look like?
Mr. Hannis, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ward, that would be a question for the department. But and if I may, Mr. Chairman, I mean, that process requires a public comment period. There's a fairly transparent process as they go through that.
So we do have an Administrative Procedures Act that outlines how rules are promulgated. And if the department does come back, which I'm not quite sure they will, but maybe I'll text them to see if they would like to answer that question on what that could possibly be. So thank you, Representative Ward. Representative Closton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple comments and then a quick question. So I appreciate the amendment decreasing from all healthcare facilities to 25 or more, right? So the small providers don't have to do this. I also appreciate, I've lately spent a lot of time in medical facilities in South Dakota and Colorado, and they all have this type of verbiage signs up, not only taking care of the physical abuse, but some of the verbal abuse that it happens to healthcare workers. So I appreciate that signage. Do you see the Hospital Association or the Department of Health helping all facilities with the signage or posters that go up?
Mr. Hannis.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Closton. I think as this bill's written, it names the Department of Health specifically. I'm more than happy to sit here today and say we'll play whatever supportive role is useful. So if that comes to us, then that's fine.
Representative Trujillo.
I just have a quick follow-up as far as the studies, and your response was mostly patients. And then you said that this was more of a study so we can know where all these things fall into place. Why the penalty if we don't even know who's doing the assaulting? I mean, if it's 60% of the patients doing the assaulting, then there's a reason why they're in there. And then we're going to penalize them for being ill. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. So I understand if it's a parent or a spouse saying, beating up the nurse because they don't want something done, granted. If it's a patient that walks in that's under the influence, he's not in his right mind and he's going to strike a nurse and a doctor, is he going to get penalized for that? Is it a mental ill patient coming in off his meds and assaulting? Is he going to get penalized for that? So I'm trying to wrap my head around the numbers as to who's doing the assaulting. I mean, I'm not against protecting healthcare workers. I have my family are healthcare workers, so I just want to understand the penalties to this.
Representative Hannis. Mr. Hannis, sorry. Thank you, Representative Trujillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Trujillo. So maybe, in my mind, those are maybe two separate issues. So currently today, if you drive a car under the influence and you kill someone, that is a different kind of penalty attached. It is a different type of crime. We don't see that as different if you come in drunk under the influence to our emergency room and you beat up our staff. We think that's different, and we think that deserves a different kind of penalty. Now, when you talk about somebody who's maybe in an inpatient psychiatric situation, that's different in our view. We currently work with police to when they are called and they come out, to, they don't necessarily have to arrest that person or cite that person. They've been good working with our facilities. I think some of our behavioral health centers, if they're not here to testify today, but have talked with us a lot about the way that they integrate that sort of interaction with law enforcement into their treatment. Again, I'm not a clinician, so I don't want to get too far over my skis here, but there is an interplay and a cooperation between provider and patient and law enforcement when those things happen. So I think there is opportunity and it's appropriate to deal with these on a case-by-case basis. But I don't think there's harm in making a report to say that this happened. And frankly, you can do that now. I mean, this law doesn't change that necessarily. I mean, if a nurse is assaulted by anybody, they have absolutely the right to call the police and make a report and either participate in that prosecution or not. So I don't think that necessarily fundamentally changes the status quo. But I think all of this together creates a different kind of environment that we think is helpful.
Please, Representative Trujillo.
So a homeless man, drunk, off his medication, falls, cracks his head on the sidewalk. The police take him into the hospital. He doesn't want service. He starts striking people. Is that an offense under one of these numbers here?
Mr. Hannes.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Trujillo, I think it's always against the law to strike other people. I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to make a legal determination on what type of offense that is. But as we sit here today, you can't go somewhere and start beating people. That's.
Anything else from the committee for Mr. Hannes? Okay, thank you very much. Whoever would like to come next, please. Mr. Odekoven, please introduce yourself for the committee, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Byron Odekoven, the Executive Director for the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. Usually I wait for some other folks to present and kind of try to clean up, so to speak, if it comes to a law enforcement issue. But since I think we're headed into the realm of the law enforcement issue right off the bat, maybe we can settle that part, or at least answer and address a couple of the issues. And then I may come back for a little cleanup later, depending upon how the world turns, Mr. Chairman. So let's start with some of the basics. So as we looked at this bill, in simple terms, it does a couple of things. It takes what is illegal now. It is a crime to do everything described in this bill. You can be arrested, charged, and imprisoned for doing what's in the bill now. The discussion is whether or not upon conviction, the court would have an opportunity to give you a higher than $750 fine. They could give you a $1,000 fine. That is the major distinction, unless I'm misunderstanding where we are in the penalty section of the bill. So if you are a patient, a spouse, companion, several terms were used, and you assault a healthcare worker, you're subject to the standard penalty, if you will, at the basic level, and that's 30 days in jail and $750 fine, up to, and that's the discretion of the court. That would raise this to a $1,000 fine, up to the discretion of the court. That's the simple version. There's several nuances that go on from there. There's several additional crimes. We could spend quite a bit of time talking about assault and battery, going on to aggravated battery, and going up from there. But in simple terms, this raises the threshold for that simple penalty. Next piece, of course, is discretion. There's three parts of the discretion. Whether the victim makes a report, this incentivizes the victims to please report so that we can understand the parameter of the issues. How many people, what types of people, some of that. There's an incentive within the bill to create that additional reporting mechanism. Second is the officer, upon the totality of reviewing that, There's some, depending upon what the circumstances are, let's say it is a mental health person. Say there is an assault, it is reported. But the physician says, hey, you know, we kind of got this under control, we're going to proceed. We have some medication on board, things are settling down. Let's not haul him off to jail. Let's continue our treatment modality. That's the discretion item 1. Item 2, in terms of discretion, is prosecutorial. So everything goes through and the prosecutor says, in the best interest of justice, we aren't proceeding with the case. So that's the third level that happens. That's all within the current statute. The only difference, as I say, is initial reporting and some penalty involved. Different folks feel different ways in terms of being assaulted at varying levels. What are they willing to tolerate in their personal life? As we've mentioned, it's illegal to strike someone. It's illegal to verbally abuse, harass, etc. So should we allow one work group, one class, as was described by the fine gentleman from the hospital folks, these people may in turn be removed from their shift. They aren't able to care for you, the next person through the door. That's troubling, I would think. And thus we would want to take steps to ensure that that continuity of care for the community continues. And if we can put signage up that says, that may influence a couple of those people to not strike or abuse their healthcare worker, I'm all in. I think that would be a pretty good policy to do. In terms of how this might look in terms of policy direction, if I may, Mr. Chairman, indulge me just a moment. Generally speaking, when it comes to criminal procedures, the legislature does not describe process. That's up to the agency, officer training, fitting within the scope of our employment, fitting within the scope of the courts, decisions that have been made prior, and thus our procedure that we go through in our local jurisdictions. You describe to other people to then do rules, if you will, to make sure. And the rules contemplated in this have to do with signage. Does not have to do with police procedure. Police procedure would follow the normal police procedure now. As I say, there's nothing in the bill that changes the normal police procedure as we conduct it now in terms of simple assault and battery discussion. So, Mr. Chairman, I rambled ever so slightly, but I hope I've answered and addressed a few questions.
Thank you, Mr. Oderkoven. Any questions from the committee? Representative Ward, and then we'll go back to the side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify that there's nothing that would preclude a healthcare facility from putting up signs right now that say, we will prosecute assault against our healthcare workers. There's nothing stopping facilities from doing that, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that is
Mr.
correct.
Oderkoven. Follow up, Representative Ward. And we'll go to, on this side. Nobody? Representative Hornick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thanks for that, some of that clarification. It does help. One of the concerns that I have within this bill is there's a fairly broad language subject to some interpretation, I suppose. I'm curious to get your opinion on this because it says anybody who makes a threat of violence against a healthcare professional. So in my opinion, that's a very subjective type of thing. A threat of violence could be somebody holding maybe like an anti-abortion type of sign outside of a healthcare facility, or just a sign that says something that somebody else would take offense to, or it could be a very broad spectrum. So how do we, what do we do with that? It seems like we're really opening the door and creating possibly a Pandora's box with some of that.
Mr. Oderkoven, do you know if there are other threats of violence in our criminal statute?
Mr. Chairman, yes. In simple terms, let me back up 3 steps and say it again. It's a crime now to make that threat of violence. Much as I did in the earlier discussion on assault, thank you for the clarification. I did not include that in my earlier point, but the threat of violence or destruction of property, injury or involving bodily or threats of an offense involving any property damage as well, that threat is a criminal offense now. Again, it would have that 30-day and $750 fine. It now makes it $1,000. But for purposes of this, it provides that clarity, what goes in the sign. What do you put on the sign is part of that discussion that is contemplated in this, my opinion. And again, we could put, thank you for the clarification, we can put signs up now, but this would put that signage for that enhanced penalty. If I may, Mr. Chairman, First Amendment protections for protests is a whole different subject, in my opinion, not part of this bill. That would be a separate discussion of First Amendment rights with protest signage, et cetera, would be contemplated in that. If that escalates to a threat of destruction of property, then we're past the First Amendment into that destruction, which would be a crime now, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else in the committee? Okay, thank you, Mr. Oakoven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to wander around the topic ever so slightly.
Who is next, please? Welcome, Ms. Stecklever. Introduce yourself for the committee again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Tony Decklever. I represent the Wyoming Nurses Association. I'm a registered nurse myself, and I can tell you that in my career, I have also been assaulted. The problem that we find in many of our facilities is that incidents are not reported. The national statistics will tell you that 30% of all assaults on nurses are reported, and about 26% of assaults on physicians are reported. So they're not reported. And if they're not reported, we can't gather the data to be able to develop a plan. So part of this is the reporting. And the problem with the reporting piece is that facilities will tell the nurses and the people that work inside the facilities, no, don't report. We'll take care of this ourselves. And what we're saying is that all incidents need to be reported. So if it rises to the level that inside the facility that they call law enforcement, then they do that. And to Representative Yin's question in the previous, when we were in judiciary, one of his questions was, do these programs work? So there are 8 states that have a comprehensive program, which was what we're trying to do here, which includes reporting, plan, and then law enforcement if it's needed. So it's a comprehensive plan. And of the 8 states that have the comprehensive plan, not just one single thing, like just penalties or just one thing, but the 8 states that have it have seen a decrease, have seen an improvement in I don't know that a reduction, but the morale and the fact that the facilities, they take this seriously. It's I sent a note out to all my nurses, or many nurses, yesterday and the day before, and all of them wrote back that well, not all of them, but of the ones that wrote back, they've all been assaulted in some form or fashion. The national statistics are that 80% of nurses have been assaulted at some point in their career. And I'm like, and I come back with, what other profession is, other than law enforcement, do people assault the folks that are trying to take care of them, that are trying to do good work? Now, we don't want our mentally ill, it always comes up, and this is what has prevented this bill from moving in the past, is what about the mentally ill, or what about the demented, or what about the impaired? And it's like, we don't want to send those people to jail. That's not the point. But it still has to be reported, because if the number of incidents are from mentally ill folks, then that facility needs to develop a plan on how to address that situation. But with lack of reporting, we just don't have the data to be able to say, well, this is where the problem is. When I was a clinician, I got incident reports. I was the safety person. I was the infection control person. And I sat down with all those reports and I looked at it and I said, is there a trend? Is there a pattern? Are people, more irritated in the evening or are they more irritated in the morning? Is it a staffing issue? What's the problem? And until I had all that information in front of me, I couldn't develop a plan. Some hospitals are really good. Cheyenne Regional, one of the nurses sent me their workplace violence plan. It's amazing. I mean, they really have a lot of stuff in there, but some of the littler places do not. Some places can afford security, some cannot. Healthcare is a tough business financially. And so sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the size of the facility. You look at WMC and CRMC, they're huge. And so you can have an incident going on in one part of the hospital, and even if they had a policeman on board, that might not get there in time to take care of it. So it's multifaceted. It's the training, it's education, it's signage, it's reporting, and then it is law enforcement when it's necessary. So we know that there's already laws on the books. We already know that. But we got to encourage our nurses to be okay with reporting and the facilities not to say, no, it doesn't, you don't need to do this. We want facilities to say, okay, it's required, we have to do this. And then we can gather more data and develop more plans. Many of the, I received a note from a behavioral health nurse who was attacked by a patient. And she was a psych nurse taking care of psych patients, had established rapport with this patient, and this patient still attacked her. The patient still had to go to the Evanston. That was that was the plan, was her to go to Evanston anyway. What was disheartening to the nurse was that the facility did not do anything to make sure that she was okay, did not support her, just basically said, well, that's part of the job. And that was it. And that's the part that just really, gets at us is that it feels like people just don't think that it's important. And so there are nurses that leave the profession because they've been assaulted. There's physicians that leave because they've been assaulted. There's some that have been killed for doing something, we're trying to take care of people. So we just want to raise awareness. We want to make this better because it's tough right now. And I would stand for any questions.
Ms. Stecklever, thank you. Before we go to others, do you know if this has also kept people from becoming a healthcare worker in the state of Wyoming?
Representative Yin, I can't say that with any sense of, oh, yes, absolutely. But it's a factor in why people don't go into healthcare. It's one of many, but it can be. And there are nurses that do say, or folks that do say, it's not safe out there. I don't want to go into this because it's just not safe out there. It does happen.
Representative Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do you feel like the signage that's being proposed in this bill not only serves as a warning to potential offenders, but would also serve as a reminder to the healthcare workers themselves to report?
Ms. Stecklever.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chadwick, yes. We all know and we've heard in comment that, if people are going to assault, they're not going to pay any attention to a sign. And in some cases the situation is very sudden. Something happens. I watched a video yesterday of a nurse taking care of a person. She was putting a dressing on a wound, and then out of nowhere, he just punched her. And he was letting her take care of him up until that point. And then he just reached out and punched her right in the face, put her on the ground. And it was picked up by a security camera. So it was that fast. But I think that when people come into buildings, just like we see in stores, shoplifting, if shoplifters will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law kind of thing. I think it is a reminder to folks that it's like, I need to hospitals are intense or, you know, acute care facilities especially are intense places, and lots of things are going on. And we have to do things to folks that they don't like. They hear things that we don't like. But if there are signs up, and a lot of places have done that, it's a good reminder that it's like, okay, I need to try and keep my emotions in check. And that's just not for patients. That's for healthcare professionals too, because, you know, situations can escalate on both sides. You start coming out at me, and I start coming out at you. And so everybody needs to like come down. So I think it would help.
Representative Chadwick, any follow-up? Anyone else? Representative Ward?
Sorry, my button wasn't working there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify that there is nothing precluding healthcare facilities from having a communication plan, from encouraging reporting, all of that. They could do that right now, correct?
Mr. Chairman,
Clever, please.
Representative Ward, yes, they could. But sometimes when it's required, then it's the incentive for people who are not doing it currently to now do it.
Any follow-up? Representative Trujillo?
So what I've heard is 30% reported, 30% of facilities are underreporting, right? Something to that effect? Facilities aren't reporting?
Ms.
Mr.
Declever?
Chairman, Representative Trujillo, the statistics that I read is that of the attacks on, and because I'm with nursing, so I'm focusing on our nurses. Of the attacks, and this is nationwide, only 30% of nurses report.
Only 30% of nurses reporting. So, and then we're punishing those who assault rather than holding the facilities accountable for their reporting actions. So this bill right now is an act relating to crimes and offenses, creating the offense of assault. And then you go down a few lines, and then it's finally establishing duties. Where's the accountability to the facilities for reporting so we can then implement these fines and penalties? I think, wouldn't you agree that the facilities are they hold a big responsibility in the reporting process? I worked for an oil and gas industry. We had to report every time we had a paper cut. That was a policy, and it was implemented within the company. So where's the facilities implementing and holding these people accountable for those reporting?
Ms. Declever, is it the facilities that aren't reporting, or is it the nurses that aren't reporting?
Representative Yen and Representative Trujillo, so inside most facilities, and to your point, if the incident happens, there is an incident report, and that is usually sent to some sort of committee or something like that. So internally, there is definitely reporting, but it doesn't go anywhere. So does the facility have the responsibility and accountability to develop policies that if this happens, then, you know, we will report to law enforcement? Yes, they should, absolutely, 100%. It is, in many cases, it's the facility that says, don't call law enforcement, we'll handle this internally. And what we're saying is that all assaults, not just incidents, but assaults, those should all be reported. And if they're reported internally, and I know that in Connecticut, there was a policy, one of the hospitals developed this policy, and in their policy, it says, if the incident involves a patient, a clinical assessment by a physician or mid-level provider must be performed to determine if the action was a direct consequence of the patient's condition or disability and thus not intentional. And that speaks to the mentally ill or demented or, you know, folks like that. So, but it's still reported. And so there should be an incident report and the facility should be looking at those things and they should be developing a plan based on that. So yes, there is a certain amount of accountability that goes to the facilities. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ms. Stecklever, is there any reporting mechanism? I mean, of course, there's a reporting mechanism to law enforcement, is to call law enforcement, but there isn't any other reporting mechanism to the Department of Health to deal with statistical collection of any types of other incidences?
Mr. Chairman, not to my knowledge. However, I will share with you that one organization that does compile some data is Workman's Comp. And so I reached out to Workman's Comp and I asked them what is the monetary, you know, part. And these are folks that have been, I mean, hurt to the point where they need medical attention or they're off duty. And so they sent me this report and they said that out of, and this is only for ambulatory care, ambulatory healthcare, hospitals, nursing and residential care facilities. So they just pulled out those particular industries. And out of 4,742 injuries, 455 claims, so about 10%, were caused by the claimant being struck or injured by a fellow worker, patient, or other individual. And the cost for those folks was almost $2 million. And that was, of the 455 claims, 747,000, almost 748,000 in indemnity claim or in payments, and 1.2 million in medical. And that doesn't also account for, Mr. Chairman, for the time off work. And so then they have to bring in either other help or travelers or something to, you know, pick up where the provider is not there.
Any other questions for Ms. Stecklever? Nope. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Whoever would like to go, please. Please introduce yourself to the committee, and then the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. My name is Ann Clement. I'm here on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association Wyoming chapter. I have a different set of statistics for you this morning based on Alzheimer's and dementia. I had a chance to speak with Representative Zwanitzer and request an amendment to otherwise exempt patients that have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or related dementia, or have otherwise have a substantiated history of memory loss that interferes with their everyday living activities. And the reason that we're asking for this amendment is that because these laws have passed in other states, there has been an opportunity to look back at the data and recognize where the judicial system falls short for those people who are living with dementia and otherwise do assault a healthcare worker, because it does happen. But what's true is that the American Bar Association has put together a 92-page brief. I'm happy to forward it to you if you have some spare time to read. But it discusses exactly what those cases have done and where people have ended up in the system in a cycle that's vicious and sadly often ends up on someone dying before it actually comes to a conclusion. And while those cases are obviously unicorns, I would hate to find one of those unicorns here in Wyoming. And what's true is there was a gentleman who was, charged with an assault that provided a 90-day incarceration. He spent 2 years in the cycle back and forth in between trying to be able to stand trial and otherwise sitting incarcerated. And before that trial came to a conclusion, he died. So we asked for this amendment to this bill in order to avoid those situations here in Wyoming. Further from that, I do have some maps to share with you. They're really nice and colorful, so hopefully you can see them from where your seat is, so you can see your county. And I can provide these for you electronically as well. But this particular map highlights those that are 65 years old and live alone. Natrona County, Converse, Niobrara, and Bighorn have the largest populations of those folks. And I would suggest that those are some of our most vulnerable people. When we're talking about persons that have been diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's, they are also twice as likely to have an underlying health condition that will likely lead to an emergency room admission. So whether it's hypertension, whether it's diabetes, they struggle with maintaining some of the medications that keep them out of emergency room situations and often find themselves needing emergency room care more often than their counterpart who does not have dementia or an Alzheimer's related disease. And so in these counties that have these higher populations where folks live alone, they're going to need to access the emergency room more often than other people across the state. And so what I would suggest, based on some of the testimony that we heard last week from some of the nurses from Cheyenne Regional Medical Center, when that nurse said that she has to go back in to provide care to that patient that's just assaulted her, she isn't necessarily talking about her moral obligation. She's actually referring to a federal law, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. And the EMT ALA provides a provision for the federal government to impose a fine of $119,942 per violation. From what I understand, many of our hospitals are operating on a razor-thin margin, and they don't have the ability to absorb that kind of a fine and continue to operate. Because like Ms. Decklever said, this is a business, unfortunately, right? Healthcare is a business. And so when we're talking about fines being imposed and people losing their jobs, we're talking about federal law. And so when we need access to those emergency rooms, and remember, that's a very American thing, right? If I know that I get sick and I need emergency care and I show up at that emergency room, they're not going to ask me for my insurance card. They're not going to ask me my ability to pay. They're going to care for me first and worry about the details later. And that isn't necessarily a right that's included around the world, right? If we go somewhere else and you get sick and you show up and you don't have money, that's just too bad. But here, we know that when we show up at that emergency room, we're going to get care to at least be stabilized before they otherwise don't provide further care for us. But the emergency room is exactly where we know that we can go. So with that, I stand for questions.
Ms. Clement, because I know Representative Chairman Zwanitzer will have to step out for, he's also presenting another bill in another committee. He has multiple bills in multiple committees right now. Would you be able to write down that proposed amendment in writing and give it to LSO, just so we can read it if we work the bill?
I would be happy to.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, if I may make one more comment, and I apologize, I meant to say this earlier. I do feel, though, also with this bill that while the intent is certainly to avoid these assaults from happening. If we have a sign on the wall, we'd like to think that someone might think twice before they do something. But I would also suggest that the intent of this bill is to show solidarity for our community members who have otherwise taken it on themselves to make this profession their livelihood and also a safety net for the community that we all live in.
Any questions for Ms. Clement from the Alzheimer's Association? Nope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go on this side first, and then we'll come back. Whichever chair works best, please introduce yourself to the committee, and then the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, representatives of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify to you today. My name is Konia Dory. I'm a registered nurse at Ivinson Memorial Hospital in our emergency department. I also belong to our vascular access team and serve on our clinical practice committee. I am here to speak emphatically in favor of this bill, obviously. I think the data presented speaks volumes to the critical nature of decreasing our workplace violence and keeping us healthcare workers safe. I'm also going to give you some personal experiences of my coworkers as well as myself of what we deal with every day. I know that other states and hospitals across the country have taken multiple steps to improve the safety there at their hospitals. We have yearly mandatory training for non-aggressive de-escalation tactics. Some people employ these teams in their hospitals. Every employee in our emergency department, including our techs, our doctors, and the nurses, have to complete this training. So when we do have an escalating patient, we know how to de-escalate with non-aggressive tactics. We do need support to be able to care for our patients in a safe environment. We also need to feel like we are supported by our community members as well as our administration at our hospitals. In the last 2 weeks alone at our hospital, our dialysis staff had to be escorted into and out of the building due to a threat of violence from a patient who became upset with them, told them he didn't trust them, and told them he would, at any given chance, take any of them out. A phlebotomist entered a patient's room, explained the procedure to the patient, that it was going to hurt, it's a poke in the arm. After obtaining consent, the patient said it hurt and punched the phlebotomist right in the face. A coworker of mine notified law enforcement after a patient's assault toward her. He kicked her in the stomach as she was trying to place oxygen on him. He was not demented. He was not mentally ill. He was a violent person. What he didn't know is that she had just returned to work after having a major abdominal surgery. On his way out of the ER, being escorted by law enforcement, he pointed his finger at her face and said, "I am going to shoot that little blonde nurse." She was told that unless action was taken against her, nothing could be done. For 6 weeks, she had her spouse bring her to and from work until she felt safe again. I personally was told by an angry patient, I will leave out the verbal assault that was thrown my direction as well as the expletives. He told me that he would kill me, that he wanted to find my babies and kill them and then eat them. This individual was not mentally ill or intoxicated. We have another patient that frequents our ER, and in the majority of his visits, he directly assaults our staff. I have been kicked in the stomach by him. He's attempted to kick me in my face. He has shoved a nurse practitioner to the floor and threatens us with physical assault at almost every occasion. I had a patient who was emergency detained for suicidal ideation, and I was told that he was going to punch me in my face if I took one step inside his room, as he grabbed a metal tray off of a Mayo stand to hit me in my face. I don't know any other profession who has to make an escape plan every time they enter a patient's room because they don't know what they're going to get. In the emergency room, and this has happened, these patients who have assaulted me, verbally threatened me, I have had to take care of on multiple occasions, because in the emergency department, we have a unique responsibility and a federal law we have to abide by called EMTALA, which means we can turn no one away, and we have to treat and retreat and provide a medical examination for anybody who walks in our doors. I have had to provide care for these patients who have kicked me or punched me throughout the rest of their stay at the hospital. We have to stabilize any of those patients, and then we have to provide transport if our needs cannot meet their critical needs. I went into emergency medicine to provide care and compassion and love to people at the worst time in their life. And nobody is having a good day in the emergency room. I understand that no one is at their best when they're there. We don't expect people to be chipper, but we should be able to expect them to not punch us or kick us or bite us or spit in our faces or threaten to kill us or our babies. My wonderful colleagues feel the same. The only job description of anybody I know who expects to get hit in the face when they go to work is an actual fighter. I just ask that you consider your sons, your daughters, your grandchildren, your sisters, brothers, nieces, nephews who are currently working in healthcare or want to work in healthcare someday, that you can look at them and say that you did everything in your power in the state of Wyoming to ensure the people that they took care of at least had some sort of penalty if they decide to punch them in the face that day. I think we have a really unique opportunity to set a precedence here. It just takes one time. It just takes a door opening to set a precedence. Things have been going on and the same for way too long. And when something goes along that's not working, you make a change. And I ask that this bill be passed and that we can protect our healthcare workers who deal with this every single day. And thank you for your consideration, and I will take any questions you have.
Thank you. Can you repeat your last name just so I don't screw it up.
Yes, Chairman, it's Dory.
Dory. Ms. Dory, appreciate it. Are there any questions from the committee? Representative Ward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very sympathetic to the stories that you've shared. Two questions. The first is there anything that precludes you from reporting assault now? And what were these assaults reported?
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Dory, please.
Representative Ward, there is nothing precluding us from reporting. These assaults, as far as I know, were reported to our administration. 2 of them were reported to law enforcement. And I know you've asked this question to everybody who's been up here, and I'm gathering your position on this bill. The problem is, and especially where I work in the emergency room, is we understand demented patients are they're scared. They're not in their right mind. Same with behavioral health patients, we understand. The problem is there are not specific rules against those people who assault us healthcare workers. And we are in a very vulnerable situation. It's sad that you go to work and you are worried every single day when you go in a patient room. You never turn your back to the door. And I feel like this bill allows for, I think it encourages greater reporting from staff. I also think the increase in a fine might deter someone's spouse from pushing you through the door or balling his fist up in your face and telling you he's going to kill you. I do think this bill creates a little stiffer penalty, and I really feel like that I do think there are people who would think twice about hurting me at my job.
Representative Ward, any follow-up? Anyone else? Representative Clouston? Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Dory.
Thank you,
Appreciate your
Chairman.
testimony. Please, come on up.
Good morning.
Introduce yourself and to the committee, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Tracy Garcia, and I'm the Chief Nursing Officer and Vice President of Clinical Services here at Cheyenne Regional Medical Center. So thank you for hearing our testimony this morning. We really appreciate it. I know our Chief Executive Officer and President, Mr. Thornell, spoke on Friday in my absence. And I just want to reiterate a couple of things from our organization and give you some additional information about what our hospital, and I think a lot of hospitals across Wyoming, are doing already in regards to this. So first of all, in our organization, we have about 10 assaults a month by patients in our organization. Yes, some of those get reported, some of those don't get reported, because we do have circumstances, you've heard a little bit about that this morning, patients with Alzheimer's, dementia, patients with mental illness, that we know that they don't understand what they're doing and don't recognize that those actions are harmful type actions. So those generally don't get told to law enforcement or reported, other than through our internal reporting system like Ms. Decklever spoke about. We do track those. That's how we keep track of the numbers of those that we have. We do have some where they get reported to law enforcement. Those are more the physical type assaults. We have, when we've had very aggressive patients, threatening patients, reported those. And law enforcement is very good about coming to our organization when we summon them and to try to help us they can. But a lot of what we hear is, well, they didn't really touch you, so there's not anything that we're going to be able to do about that. That's not going to get prosecuted. Might write a ticket. Occasionally, they will arrest an individual who is assaulting somebody. But what we do at our organization, and we have since 2018 had a workplace violence committee in our organization when we started to see a lot of escalation of violence within our general organization. So part of what that committee is, we meet on a routine basis. We have provided education to all of our staff on what workplace violence is, how to report it, what the avenues are to follow through on issues related to that. We also created a compact with our patients. So if we have a patient who is aggressive towards a staff member, then we have a conversation. It will either be the physician or could potentially be an administrator. We'll have a conversation with them and say, these particular things are not allowed in our organization. We ask them to sign that they agree that they cannot have those actions and try to get them on board with that. There are, however, some limitations to that because we can have them sign the paper all day. The next day, they're also potentially still abusive. And if we're still providing care to that patient, what do you do with that patient? And we have a lot of repeat offenders. And I know that you just heard that similar to Ivinson, where they take care of those same patients over and over again. And we have those patients that will come back in and seek care in our organization again, and we're obligated to treat them and have a very difficult time with how do we disposition them to someplace else? They still require care. But if they continue to not be held accountable, to not have actions against them, to not potentially have to serve some time in jail or have some fines, and recognize that it's not okay to assault people that are trying to help you, they are going to continue to come in and have those actions and be able to behave like that over and over again. And we still have the obligation to care for them. So we're in a very unique position. As you've heard, from my colleague at Ivinson as well, is that you can't just turn these people away. They're coming to seek care. That's why we all went into healthcare, is to seek care. And to take care of those people that are seeking care and to take care of them when they need it, but was not to get the brunt of that. So just a little background. So I've been in my position for about 6.5 years at Cheyenne Regional. Before that, I spent almost my entire career in the emergency department. I was a staff nurse in the emergency room and a charge nurse, and I was eventually their manager and their director. And I've been assaulted myself in the emergency department, and I haven't been in the emergency department in 6 years. Serving in one capacity or another. And I can tell you, it is extreme now compared to what it was when I worked in the emergency department. I feel bad for all of those staff that work there because it was a few here and there that we would have these assaults, but to have a 75% increase over the last few years of these assaults, and to be getting assaulted more than law enforcement and parole officers and corrections officers and people that are dealing with some of those patients that just are really nasty and ugly all the time, it's just not acceptable. And we are having such a hard time recruiting people into clinical positions. So in my organization, I also oversee the pharmacy, the lab, respiratory therapy, so other clinical positions outside of nursing. And it is hard to recruit people into those clinical positions. And a lot of what we've seen and heard is that people aren't going into healthcare because of these types of situations. It's not safe. They don't feel supported by their communities, by their states, with taking care of them. They don't feel like what they're doing and putting themselves in those positions is even cared about by anybody. So when we're talking about 10 years from now, when we have an increase in the nursing shortage because we can't recruit people to come to Wyoming because we're the only state that doesn't have legislation against healthcare worker violence, it's going to make it even more difficult. And then when you and I, as we get older and we start to get sick, it's going to be very difficult to have people available to take good care of us because we have not supported them in the profession that they want to do to provide the best care to the patients. And thank you very much. And I'm open for questions, Mr. Chairman or representatives.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Are there any questions for Ms. Garcia? We'll go with Representative Chadwick first, and then we'll go over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Ms. Garcia, you as a healthcare provider get assaulted, and then you have to continue to provide care to that individual. Do you have the ability, the right to refuse to do that? Are there ramifications if you do that? Or can you just say, no, I'm not going back in that room. He's already assaulted me. I'm not going there again.
So,
Ms. Garcia, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chadwick, sometimes, yes. It would depend on the situation. If I was working on a floor where there are 5 other nurses, and maybe it's just, I feel like this patient has had a conflict with me and they've lashed out at me, then I could ask to have my assignment changed potentially and not take care of that patient. But what I can tell you is that I worked for 5 years in the emergency department on night shift. There were 2 hospitals here at the time, and I was the only nurse. I was the only person besides the doctor who was sleeping in the middle of the night when he didn't have patients to see, that was in the department taking care of patients. And in that circumstance, if I don't take care of the patient, who's going to? There will be nobody else there that can provide that care. And unfortunately, the problem with that is 9 times out of 10, I'm not taking care of one patient. I'm taking care of 4 to 6 patients. And not only have I now impacted my ability to be able to care for the patient who has now assaulted me, who probably still requires some kind of medical treatment, but I also have 4 or 5 other patients that I'm obligated to provide care to. And do you think that that care is going to be as good as the care that the patients were getting before I was all shaken up from that situation? My ability to focus and to be able to provide that same level of care that I would want to hold myself accountable to is going to be very difficult in that situation. But there are some times you can remove yourself from that situation. But also you feel guilty. If I'm going to remove myself from that situation, am I going to ask my colleague to end up stepping in and taking care of this patient and potentially get assaulted also?
Any follow-up, Representative Chadwick? No. Representative Ward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the 75% increase in the past few years of assault. I'm wondering if you know how many of those assaults were due to people not wanting to comply with mandates, since the increase has happened in the past few years.
Ms. Garcia, if you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Ward, I don't know a percentage. A lot of times when we see patients, if they're not mental health patients or substance abuse patients, a lot of our patients lash out if they don't get medications, specifically narcotic medications that they're requesting for whatever the condition is. But I do not know an actual percentage of that.
Any follow-up, Representative
Yes,
Ward?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned it's hard to recruit nurses and medical people. I have a daughter who'd like to become a nurse, but the thing that's stopping her is that she doesn't want to get vaccinated. So my question is it possible that it's hard to recruit people because they don't want to comply with a vaccine mandate?
Ms. Garcia, you can answer that if you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ward, I'm sure that there's a whole array of different things that might prevent people from going into healthcare in this day and age. But I do know specifically that there has been someone that came to our organization to work and actually during orientation told our chief executive officer that he almost didn't come here because of the fact that we didn't have a law against assault against healthcare workers. So I'm sure there's a whole array of reasons that people don't go into healthcare, but I do believe that this is a primary one.
Representative Trujillo.
Out of the frequent flyers that you guys see and I guess that's what we'll just call it, how many of them are homeless? Do you know the statistics on that?
Ms. Garcia.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Trujillo, I don't know the exact statistics on that. There is my estimation, so last year I did review the assaults for earlier testimony, and I'd say probably about, out of the cases that I looked at the time, there was 22-ish cases. About a third of them were probably homeless, but the rest of them were not.
Any follow-up? Nope. On this side. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned about working at night in the ER, and I don't know what time that would have been, but currently, what are the staffing ratio requirements for the emergency department? As I understand, it's required that there are 2 nurses in the emergency department in the ICU. Can you speak to that, please?
Ms. Garcia.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Penn. So fortunately, in our organization, since we're one of the bigger hospitals here in Wyoming, our staffing is a lot better. than I'd guess it is in Cody and Powell and some of those other organizations. Our policy currently at our hospital is there have to be 2 registered nurses on a particular unit at any given time. And that is really for safety. If something were to happen to one of those nurses, there's still a nurse that can provide care to that. In our organization, we probably have 5 or 6 nurses on a night shift right now that can care for patients, but I would guess that that's probably not the norm across the state.
Representative Hornick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Garcia, thanks. I imagine it is difficult because, like you said, you do see patients on the worst days unless it's probably delivering a baby. So most of the situations are negative circumstances. I'm curious, the way that things currently are, if there's an incident at the hospital, I guess part of my question is, how is that reported? It gets reported up the chain, and then does the hospital, is there somewhere that who makes a determination of whether that's worthy of calling the police, or is every situation reported to the police? How does that happen currently?
Ms. Garcia, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornick, in our organization, every incident, we do request that they put in an incident report for tracking. Depending on the seriousness and the escalation of the incident, we are also fortunate in our organization to have security. So when those patients escalate in our organization, we will call security. We call what's called a code yellow, which is that someone that's acting out. Security will go to that. Depending on what is going on with the patient, law enforcement might be called right at that point to come in and intervene and help our security officers through that. Otherwise, if they just get reported, when you put in, an employee puts in an incident report, that incident report goes to their manager. Their manager then will review that report, will meet with the employee to find out the instances related to that. If there's an injury, that employee will also go to our occupational health and be evaluated to make sure that they're okay to go back to work or if they require further treatment. Then those reports, like I talked about, we have the Workplace Violence Committee. So we review those reports at our meeting at Workplace Violence to determine, are we seeing a pattern in behavior? Are we seeing the same person over again? Do we feel that something that wasn't reported needs to be reported, or how do we keep track of those and then build a plan related that way?
Representative Hornick, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this bill is passed and enacted into law, will there be a change in what you do? And then, I see this as potentially something that now you will have to report every single situation that happens. What do you see as changing from what you currently do if this law is enacted?
Ms. Garcia?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornick, yes, we would have to report all of those in the way that the bill is currently written. That would change, that we don't necessarily report all of those. We don't report them to the Department of Health. We don't report them, every single one of them, to law enforcement. So that would change. As far as some of the other stipulations in there, we already have signage in our organization that says that those types of behaviors, as well as other things related to carrying illegal substances, aren't allowed in our organization. And most of the other guidelines we already have instituted in our organization, but the key thing will be reporting of every single one of those incidents. And that can be time consuming and probably overwhelming. But I think even if it prevents just one further assault of a person, it is definitely to a benefit of not just that person, but our organization and our community in general.
Any follow-up, Representative Hornick? No. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Garcia.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other members of the public that would wish to testify on this bill? Okay, and there are no attendees online, so given that, I will close public comment. Committee, what is your pleasure? Move the bill from.
Second amendment.
We have a bill moved from Representative O'Hearn and seconded from Representative Chadwick. So we have one proposed amendment that already came from Chairman Zwanitzer, did the Alzheimer's Association give you a written amendment for what they wanted? Nope. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Mr. Chairman, they did give it to me, and as I think you're aware, I had some issues this morning, and I have not been to my desk to grab it. So I can conceptually move it, or I can bring it on first reading if the bill passes. But I do think that amendment is important.
And we have another proposed amendment. So we have a motion on the bill. Would someone like to run the original proposed amendment by Representative Zwanitzer first? Mr. Chairman.
So technically, you're the chairman, Mr. Chairman. But I would move the amendment with my name on it that this limits the bill to institutions of 25 employees or more. It also deletes that 24 hours after incident. And while it's not actually contained in this amendment, Mr. Chairman, there was some comments from the department on the reporting and what happens, but there's no penalty for that reporting. So it's encouraged, but it's not like there would be any, no, you wouldn't go after them or their license or anything. It's just a strong encouragement, I guess.
So there's a motion on the amendment. Is there a second on the amendment? Second from Representative Chadwick. So the amendment that we're currently working on is the proposed H4301. Is there any discussion, other discussion on the amendment? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Chairman. I do appreciate the fact that this changes the broad word institution into, or to decrease it to an institution of 25 employees or more. This would pose a significant burden on smaller healthcare facilities that, and a lot of times, we've heard testimony today about most of these things happening in emergency departments and in larger facilities. The likely or the incidence of assaults on healthcare workers in smaller clinics is significantly less. And so I think that that's a very fair assessment. I do support this amendment.
Any other discussion on the amendment? Representative Ward?
I am also for this amendment.
Okay. Chadwick? Nope. Representative Hornock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. Do we know what we're dealing with as far as the number of facilities? Obviously, we've got several large hospitals throughout the state, and then do we have an idea of that compared to the 25 or under employee with the clinic? I'm just curious.
Representative Zwanitzer, do you know that number?
I do not, Mr. Chairman, but again, committee, I just remind you, this is solely related to the reporting requirements contained. And so on page 6, we're deleting some of the onerous language and just trying to encourage people to report. And so I don't want to put a burden on small businesses or small clinics. So this would just really apply to larger healthcare facilities who are already doing this in almost all cases. And so really the testimony I had was, pretty much this is already the cutoff of the people who are doing this, but it just across the board uniformly says thou shalt. So I don't know the number of larger versus smaller clinics, and we don't really divide anywhere in our statutes, what is a large healthcare facility. There are no kind of stratifications that I could find on statutory citations. So this is my best guess, working with the Nursing Association of Hospitals, of where that line is.
Representative Hornock?
Thank you. No, that helps. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other discussion on the amendment? Okay. Question on the amendment being called. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Amendment passes. Would any other folks who have brought one of these proposed amendments like to discuss those first? Representative Penn.
Okay, so let's go to Amendment 303. I don't know if that's the proper way to.
Sure.
303. My reason for bringing this amendment is to also decrease the impact of regulation on these facilities. We've heard that many of these facilities are already reporting, but once again, pointing to smaller facilities and actually 25 employees. There are still many facilities that would be affected by the reporting requirements, which are still small. And there's these regulations are fairly rigorous. And so I would like to change the shalls to mays. If you go to page 7, line 7, paragraph I, as far as the requirement to post a sign, as we've already established, anyone can post a sign at this time. I don't think that we need to regulate the need to post the sign and the size of the sign and those types of things. If facilities feel like this is beneficial to them, by all means, post a sign. We can do that now. I don't feel like we require regulation in order to do that.
So Representative Penn, please move the amendment, and then we'll see if there's a
Thank you.
second.
I move this amendment, 303.
Is there a second to Representative Penn? Seconded by Ward. Is there any other discussion on the amendment?
Do you want me to walk through? There's some other.
If you would like, please, Ms. Penn, and because the public can't see the proposed amendments that we have in front of us, if you would, it would be great for the public to hear what the amendment does.
So continuing on from what I've just said, page 7, lines 20 through 22, which says a listing of that the requirement will include listing of best practices, toolkits, resources, including OSHA and JCO accreditation organizations. A lot of times those don't apply to smaller clinics. And I think it's reasonable to not include that in this regulation. Once again, if facilities want to use those resources, then that's certainly available to them already. Moving on, let's see, the rest of, there's renumbering, and then page 9, lines 2 and 3. I would like to take out, it's talking about personal education, and I would have these lines stricken. Policies requiring each healthcare provider and employee who provides direct care to patients at least annually receive education. So once again, the requirement for a facility to provide the employees with education. I don't feel that we've heard testimony that has told us that in educating an employee that it's against the law to be struck or abused. I'm not sure that that's important, especially as a regulatory thing. Once again, people, this is something that's already illegal, and to require a facility to tell their employees that it's illegal, at risk of potentially losing their license if they don't, I think that's a little, it goes too far.
Any other discussion on the amendment? Representative Clouston.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, my question would be, these large facilities, they need training not only for safety if the employee is assaulted, but also safety of the facility, evacuation procedures, if there's somebody with a gun. These large facilities need to have training and education that the staff does annually, that they know how to respond to a critical situation. So of the amendment, I guess that's the part that I would like to leave in.
Representative Penn, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that. And I would say that these actually are already required. We go through intense amounts of the training that are required to make sure that we know the procedures for, if there is a fire, know the procedures for all of these things. I don't think that this bill changes that. I think that those practices are already in place with the mountains of education that are already required by some of these, OSHA and other agencies.
Any other discussion on the amendment? Question on the amendment. Question being called. All those in favor of the 303 proposed amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Okay, the amendment passes. Representative Penn, do you want to do your other amendment?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So going back to the punishments that we're discussing, I would just like to drop the fine of misdemeanor from $1,000 to $750. I don't think that increasing the monetary amount is going to change whether someone assaults. In fact, we've heard testimony to that very fact, that people coming in to be treated, a lot of times the people who are quite violent end up coming through the by ambulance, and therefore through doors that aren't going to see a sign that there is increased penalties. But the biggest issue here, and this is coming from a nurse. I'm a nurse, an ER nurse. I was in the emergency department for 5 years as an RN and for 5 years as a nurse practitioner. I've been assaulted. I've had coworkers assaulted. I feel those stories. I recognize that there is a problem in our society. Our society has degraded to the point where these are the things that we're now dealing with. Do I think that because I've chosen this as my profession to care for people, do I think that I should be put above an old lady walking down the street who gets punched in the face? I actually don't. And so I feel like the current penalties, which are, it's already illegal to do these things to people. I feel that that's fair. And,
Yes,
once
please,
again,
please move the
I'm
amendment.
sorry.
Thank you,
I move
Representative.
Amendment 302.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Representative Ward. Any other discussion? Representative Swanson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't think it significantly hinders the bill, so if that helps it get passed, certainly in favor of this amendment. Question?
Question on the amendment. All those in favor of 302 amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The amendment passes. Representative Swanson, do you want to move the conceptual amendment, or do you want to do that as a committee of the whole? How would you like to take that?
I want you to take more testimony from the committee while I look.
Is there any other discussion on the bill from the committee? Representative Hornock, please. We'll go down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How long do you need me to talk? So something that was part of the last testimony, I'm kind of wavering approving this bill, and here's why. Because what happens now in the reporting process and everything like that, it puts the burden on the employer to report those, to figure out what the, if it's in line with their policies, if they should report it, should escalate it further to be reported. One of the issues I have with this bill is that it seems like this bill will require every incident to be reported. And so I think one thing that could potentially happen with this is that an employee could lose the constitutional right to bring a suit against their employer because they feel like they're not being heard, they're not being listened to. It now puts the burden on the government. Well, we have this law in place, so the employer kind of washes their hands of their responsibility, and they throw up their hands and say, well, we just have to report this in every way and let the cops deal with it, let other institutions deal with it, let the government deal with it, since that's something in line. So constitutionally, I think that we are kind of sidestepping one of the constitutional rights of individuals to bring a suit against their employer. So I think we're treading on thin ice with that one. And then also, I do think that there are some constitutional issues with violating an individual's rights who is walking into a facility to get care. I mean, not taking into account the issue of violence. I mean, that's a terrible thing for somebody to be assaulted at the workplace, insulted or assaulted at the workplace. It's kind of a terrible thing. But I think we're, I'm going to vote no on this just because I think we're treading on some thin ice with those constitutional issues with this one. We seem to have the hospitals have policies in place that they're correct. It's probably very underreported, which is a problem. But I think we're putting that burden on us as legislators rather than the employee, keeping it at the employer level is kind of messing with a constitutional issue on this one. So that's my reason for voting no on this. Thank you.
Representative,
I'm sorry, could I just ask a question of Representative Hornock?
Representative Ward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said require. I think the amendment we passed says may, so I don't think it's a requirement now.
Representative Hornock, you're welcome to answer that. Otherwise, we can keep going if you'd like.
Let me chew on that. I
Okay,
don't have an answer.
Representative
Thank
Penn,
you.
please.
Thank you. You know, I think that we want this bill to do a lot of things. We want it to stop assaults on healthcare workers, and I fully support that. The question is, will it actually do that? And, you know, I alluded to the fact that we've seen the degradation of society, and that's something that we're dealing with. I don't think that this bill is gonna fix that. The thing I do like about this bill is the requirement to report. We did hear testimony that there are facilities that aren't wanting to report. I haven't experienced that, thankfully, in the facilities that I've been. It's actually the opposite. Administration that may not be so supportive on other things. If something happens to one of their workers, they're ready to report it. They want to support. The times when I see that maybe there may be a willingness to not report or a tendency to not want to report might be in nursing homes or residential facilities, where if they're reporting those things, that may mean loss of the resident and therefore loss of income. And so for that purpose, I actually do see a purpose in this bill. And I just want to make sure that people understand that this isn't going to make assaults stop, you know, but it's an effort to do what we can do still to support nurses and try to facilitate that process.
Nope. Anybody else? Representative Closton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I see this as, I guess, a message. You know, we see a lack of respect of police officers and teachers and nurses and frontline, you know, EMTs. You know, those workers need to know that their employers plus the state respects them and is trying to support them. And this is a message to society a little bit in that these people are important to our society and you need to respect them. You know, as far as the constitutional rights, 49 other states have this. I don't see that as being a problem. And then, you know, we have law enforcement and our healthcare people coming to us saying, this is something that we need. We need you to support us on this bill. So I'm in full favor of this.
Any other discussion? Representative Ward?
Yeah, I just want to add that it seems to me that we need to address the federal overreach that requires us to keep treating patients that assault healthcare workers. Like, you know, the federal government, no, we're not going to keep treating these people who are beating up our workers. So, I mean, that needs to be addressed. I'll probably be a yes on this bill as amended.
Representative Hornock?
Mr. Chairman, just so the language of the amendment changes shall to may. I think I may be a no. It's not that I shall be a no. Thank you.
Move the bill. At the bills, we're still on the bill. It is, or has already been moved. Representative Swanitzer has called the question, so please, Marilyn, take the roll.
Thank you, Chairman Yin. Representative Chadwick. Aye. Representative Clouston. Aye. Representative Hornock.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Penn.
Aye.
Representative Trujillo.
Aye.
Representative Ward.
Aye.
Representative Swanitzer. Chairman Yin.
Aye. So thank you, everyone. We did one bill in an hour and 38 plus whatever we had in the previous meeting. I'll turn over the, so the next bill is also Chairman Swanitzer's. So we will have him present the next bill and we'll go into it as much as we can until we have to go upstairs.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman and committee. Knowing that our time might be short, I brought two of what I think are the simplest bills this year. And if they don't make it today, they're not coming back. So this is House Bill 133, electrical installation by licensed electricians. Though we haven't heard any, we are the Labor and Health Committee. So we are also the committee where all of the labor issues come, which we'll get a lot in the interim. So that's why this is before us. Apparently there is an issue mostly with out-of-state companies. Well, let me jump back real quick. If you want to do electrical work in this state, you have to be a licensed electrician. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's basically how it is. You have to go through certifications and apprenticeships, and it's a complicated process for people who want to engage in this kind of work, but they're highly trained and specialized. Apparently, when there are some concerns with some of our newer electrical future plants coming online, that we have some companies, especially from out of state, who are hiring people to work on what we'd call electrical generating equipment. And so they're saying they don't need licensed electricians to work on that because it's not actually electrical yet, which seems to be a weird thing for me. But apparently it is not covered, and there's ways that people are getting around, us not covering electrical generating equipment, because if it's not electrical yet. So I'm just including all electrical generation equipment and the electrical statutes. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Chairman Swanser? Representative Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. How would this apply to, say, a person who wants to have backup power for their house and they want to put in a small solar generator, or they want to have a backup generator? Do they have to be a licensed electrician to install that?
Representative Swanser, please.
Chairman Yin, Representative Ward, my understanding is if you have any kind of commercial transaction and you are paying someone to do that work, they need to be a licensed electrician. If you're doing it yourself, you don't need that. But yes, and that's, I think, where a lot of this is coming from, is in wind turbines, more industrial level, and then solar, people are coming in who aren't licensed electricians to install these systems that will generate electricity, but since they don't, they apparently don't have to be licensed.
Any follow-up, Representative Ward? Representative Hornock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the bill, you add, there is specified in the bill the terms power inverters, power optimizers, and power monitors. Can you tell me why those specific things are included?
Certainly, Chairman Yin, Representative Hornock, I can tell you why they're included, and that was at the behest of industry, saying these are things that are perhaps in question right now, and they're here as well to testify on exactly why they've included that language.
Any follow-up? Please, Representative Hornock.
Yeah, I would just, as we go through, I understand the need for licensed electricians, but including those three items, that's something I'd like to know if it's okay if they don't really include those things, because there's a broad range of power inverters. You can go online and buy a power inverter. It changes AC to DC or DC to AC. Kind of thing. You can plug one into your car. I mean, there are certain situations where it seems like some of those things we're narrowing this down a little bit. I understand installing solar panel type things, but I wonder as we go through this if they would be agreeable to an amendment on those things. But yeah, thank you.
Chairman Yin, Representative Hornock, you're in for a fascinating 2 years in the world of electricity. We've come a long way in my 20 years. You used to have a licensed electrician set up your stereo in your home. So we've gone a long way on what is and what isn't necessary for a licensed electrician to do. And I think you'll hear some of that testimony.
Representative Claston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, just wondering, it seems to me if you're hooking up anything to electricity or power is going down the line and you can affect other people's lives or property, it has to be somebody who's licensed and hopefully insured. Will this accomplish that?
Representative Swanser.
Chairman Yin, Representative Clouston, I sure hope it does. I mean, I think the belief on this bill was it was included, but people find interesting loopholes when it comes to doing business. And so that's why this is here before, and I think you'll hear that testimony.
Representative Swanson, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So, I think solar panels and wind turbines, at least the ones that get installed residentially, are pretty self-contained units. So I guess I'm trying to understand what is the risk, because usually we have licensure regimes to make sure that risk is mitigated, so safety is ensured and we don't burn people's houses down, right? So when does the person who needs to screw in the panel onto the roof, secure the panel to the roof, does that person need to be a licensed electrician under this bill? Like not just wire it together and plug it in when electricity is actually flowing, but like install the panel onto the roof before any wiring is done. Does that have to be a licensed electrician?
So Chairman Yin, I think there's probably two separate. There are people who completely do what we would call, say, live off grid. And then there are others who return power into the grid in what we would call a net metering scenario, which is in the other body and you'll all hear about. And so there's probably the difference. If you're connecting into the grid at all, you certainly need a licensed electrician. If you have a completely self-installed unit, I think you'll hear testimony that it's in best practice for insurance reasons, for building codes, that you still want a licensed electrician to be able to hook that into your home at risk of fire, any other numbers of damages, that your insurance company certainly wants a licensed electrician to do that work.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to follow up on what the chairman here said, so does this bill actually change what is required? So even though it might be good practice to have a licensed electrician do these things, will this bill require that to be done? Say somebody has a lot of experience, but they don't actually have a license, they feel comfortable doing it themselves. Will this prevent that?
Representative Swanson.
Chairman Yin, Representative Penn, nothing in this bill prevents you from doing your own electricity in most cases. If you're building your own home, you have to go through some building codes and some processes, obviously. I think this, really in my mind is a cleanup bill. I believe this was truly thought that setting up electrical generating equipment was already covered, and some companies are saying, no, it's not specific. And so that's why industry has brought this, saying, we've always operated under this belief, but now other companies are saying, no, we just want to clean up the statute. And you'll hear that testimony as soon as you let me off the hot seat.
Any other questions for Representative Swanson? Great, thank you. So please come on up, folks who want to testify. We'll take as much as we can today.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tammy Johnson with Wyoming State AFL-CIO, and I've brought with me two industry partners who work on electrical installation and electrical generation equipment, and I'll let them explain the details.
Please introduce yourselves and then you guys have the floor.
It's electric.
My name's Travis Spears. I'm actually the owner of the electric and solar specialist here in town. I am a master electrician. I've been licensed here since 2015 as a master. I was an apprentice from 2006 till 2010 and got my journeyman's license. Got to the point where I wanted to go out on my own, and I figured if I was gonna be busy running all over the nation working for somebody else, I might as well be that busy and work for myself right here in Cheyenne. So I'm local, native, grew up here. This is what I do. So I think essentially what this bill is discussing, and I know there was a lot of questions about your own electrical installations if you feel comfortable doing your own stuff. And I believe the way the state statutes read right now for electrical installations is that you are allowed to do your own electrical installations on your own primary residence. So if you own residential rental properties and you are doing your own electrical work there, then that would be against state statute. A couple other things to touch base on are we, as a solar contractor, received a letter from the state fire marshal or state chief electrical inspector. And in that letter, it stated that all electrical equipment is required to be installed by a licensed electrician working underneath a Wyoming licensed contractor, electrical contractor. And any apprentices are required to be registered in a state recognized apprenticeship program. I guess the requirements of that with the electrical installations is that it's about life safety. It's not so much about being comfortable or doing enough YouTube videos and finding out that You can change an alternator on a car. This is about working on a residence that people reside in that may not be your residence. And if something were to happen, an incorrect installation, and somebody gets hurt and killed, and there's no installation, or there's no insurance, no bonding of that contractor, who's going to be held liable for that? So the bill itself is, I guess, trying to clean up the fact that any electrical generating equipment, so the optimizers, which are your built-in rapid shutdown for the entire system, that keeps your linemen safe downstream. If there's an outage that happens, say a pole breaks and comes down, they don't want your system backfeeding that grid that can send 240 volts back to their transformer. That will boost that power back to 13,000 volts running down the line to the linemen. Ultimately, we want to keep everybody safe. I mean, even my employees, I don't mind them going home tired at the end of the day, but I don't want them going home hurt. Or not going home at all. Some of the issues that we're running into is we are called into a project to repair something that's been done by, let's call them a solar technician or a wind technician. They don't have the understanding of AC and DC theory because they haven't gone through the rigorous apprenticeship program that we've gone through. So the idea of keeping things safe and grounding things to limit the fault current of the event that may have happened. An arc flash is 30 times hotter than the surface of the sun. So it doesn't take much to cause a pretty severe burn. The rail system that is attached to your roof that the panels are being mounted to is your equipment grounding conductor. If that is done incorrectly, then the opportunity of having a higher than normal event is there. We want to dissipate that energy to earth immediately. As electricians, we understand this stuff because we go through all this training. I went through 570 hours of class, 16,000 hours of on-the-job training, and 9 hours of testing to do what I do. Having somebody go through a 40-hour course to say that I'm certified, I don't think is enough. I mean, in Colorado, they allow you to have I guess it's called a residential wireman's license. That is a second-year apprentice in the state of Wyoming. And those guys are wiring houses down there. We don't allow that up here. We have a requirement of no more than 2 apprentices to 1 journeyman. You got to have a journeyman at least overseeing the work that's going on. They have a level of supervision that's a requirement. And here in Wyoming, like we have to monitor that. We have to make sure we're following those rules. So when we're up doing projects and trying to get these taken care of and going back and repairing other people's work, that they paid somebody who was a professional or I don't know exactly how to say it, but and they're not doing a code compliant install. And I mean, and even inspectors make mistakes and don't catch everything. We all do, but it's how we respond to it. These companies are coming in and doing the work, and then you're never seeing them again when you call them back to repair it. So then that's when we get called back in. There was a house that burned down out off of Harvest Loop. Not even, I think it was 3 months after the solar installation was completed. It was not done by a local contractor. It was not done by a licensed electrical contractor. There was a licensed electrical contractor on the permit. I don't know that it was the solar side that caused the fire. I don't believe that the fire department actually came up with a exact cause of fire. But this is stuff that we want to prevent from happening. So.
Ms. Johnson?
Mr. Chairman, part of this bill is consumer protection to protect the people who are kind of being taken by these certified electrical installers, not licensed. And the other part is to protect the workers who work in all aspects of our electrical system. So really the bill is a cleanup as Chairman Zwanitzer said, to be more specific so that these people who come into the state to do this work, or people who are trying to cut corners on consumer hired electrical work are protected. So it just clarifies it so that they know we're not accepting certifications. Thank you.
So before we take questions, would you like to introduce yourself? Give any testimony?
Truett Thompson, just really IBW Local 415 here in Cheyenne. We cover all of eastern Wyoming. My job is I work at the local here, and I go travel around the state or our jurisdiction and go talk to people. That's my job. I've noticed the increase of more out-of-state contractors doing this work and have called state inspectors, city inspectors, county inspectors, and hey, are these guys licensed? Hey, do you know they're out here? And 9 times out of 10, they have no clue that these guys are here. They come in, they do the work, they get out. They say there's a contractor on the permit. Nobody goes out to double check that that contractor's on site while they're doing this install. So it is a big thing. I really think that this is a cleanup, and it'll hopefully get the municipalities on board with actually going and doing the proper inspection and enforcement of our license that we hold near and dear to us. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson and Mr. Pearson, Mr. Thompson, before we go to questions, do you know if there are any other, how is this handled in other states, or if there are any municipalities in Wyoming that have stricter rules around this than we do on the state level?
Mr. Chairman, I can't really speak for other states. I know my counterparts in Colorado are trying to run the similar legislation currently because it's gotten rampant down there to where they just have to start honing this in to get it under control so there's not an accident that'll happen. I don't know if you remember the incident with the wellheads back in the early 2000s where the person got shocked and died. And then the legislation finally stepped up and said, hey, that work has to be done by a licensed electrician. I really hate to see that happen here in Wyoming again with the ground mount system. Little kid come running by and touch it and get electrocuted. I really hate to see that in this state.
Representative Penn.
So thank you, Chairman. The example that was given of the house that burned down recently, you mentioned that there was a licensed contractor on the permit. Would that would this fix that situation? If someone, what does that mean, somebody on the permit versus somebody doing the work? Does this clarify that?
Mr. Pierce.
So a lot of things that are happening is, even though the permit is being pulled, it's usually in county by a solar contractor. They are naming an electrical contractor as the person that's doing the electrical tie-in. So the solar contractor is coming up out of Colorado because in Colorado, they're allowed to, like Mr. Thompson said, run rampant. They're coming up here, installing the rails, which is the equipment grounding conductor for the entire system. They're putting in the optimizers or the microinverters, and they're running the wire from that all the way out. So this way their electrician doesn't have to get on the roof to tie the system into the actual grid. Any sort of wire pulling, conduit running, grounding of any sort of apparature that is attached to electrical generating equipment, according to our chief electrical inspector, is required to be done by licensed electricians. I think what we're running into is that we might not have, I think they're trying to use that loophole that they're not actually tying the stuff in yet. They're just placing it on the structure, but they're still not doing it correctly. And they're trying to operate underneath what they call like a NABCEP, which is a 40-hour course, a NABCEP certification. It's still not even equivalent to what our apprentices are going through in their first year of our apprenticeship. The safety aspect of it, I think, is the biggest concern. And I think if the bill goes through and passes, having it on there that clears it up, that it is to be installed, all electrical equipment, including the optimizers, the rail that is the equipment grounding conductor, any mechanical attachment that is a part of this electrical installation by licensed electricians in the state of Wyoming, then there's no gray area. It is laid out in black and white that this must be done by licensed electricians.
Follow up, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, just so the wording in this bill says, licensed master electrician or journeyman electrician shall install all electrical equipment. That's currently already in statute. What we're adding here is including all electrical generation equipment. So with what you were just saying, so that instance we just talked about, the house burning down and this electrician being on the permit, Has this solved that problem just because we're now dealing with electrical generation equipment, or do we still have that problem?
I think this would
Mr.
solve
Pierce,
that problem
please.
because I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman and Representative Penn. I think this would solve that problem because it now takes that gray area out that is allowing the solar techs installing the equipment on the roof and is now requiring it to be done by licensed electricians that understand the actual AC and DC theory of the system, and including the grounding of that system. To give you an idea, like our grounding section in our code book is like that big. We have a book that's that thick that explains that section. That section alone is literally the life safety of everything that we do. That is the reason why we have ground fault circuit interrupters. That's the reason why we have arc fault circuit interrupters. Everything in this is to dissipate any sort of event to ground. And when you have people that don't understand that, it definitely presents a danger to anyone that resides in that property.
Mr. Pierce, so I guess I'm curious if, so a master electrician still has to be there to tie it into the grid, is that correct?
Representative Bien, not so much. A licensed journeyman must be on site to do all of the electrical installations. A journeyman electrician must be there on site. The master electrician is the qualified supervisor who is held accountable for everyone downstream.
So if the master electrician is accountable, when the place that burned down, are they still accountable for that work that the solar installers did on the roof if that caused the fire?
Chairman Yin, I'm not 100% sure, and I don't know that they're held accountable to the accountability yet because I don't know if they are coming to the conclusion of what exactly caused that fire. There's been a lot of back and forth, and I don't know if anything has actually been resolved on that yet.
Any other questions from the committee? Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thank you for coming today. My question earlier, dealing with inverters, optimizers, monitors, is that part of a solar system? So if we limited the language to solar panels, wind turbines, and hydroelectric generators, does that cover those inverters, optimizers? What's the advantage of having that inverter optimizer language within that line to specify what that is? Because those are all over the gamut as far as size and whatnot.
Mr.
Chairman
Pierce.
and Representative Hornet, I believe if we even alter that language a little bit to any listed and labeled equipment installed for power generation equipment, that would encompass your generators, your wind turbines, your hydroelectric, your solar, your any sort of battery backup, anything that would be producing power and putting it back on the grid. That would encompass all of that aspect as listed equipment, which also is defined in our NEC, our National Electrical Code. That anything that is installed as an electrical component must be listed and labeled or listed and or labeled for its intended purpose. So I think that would clear up a lot of it. And I think the biggest thing is even the mechanical attachment to the roof, the rails themselves, the ground mount structure, those are all your equipment grounding conductor. It is carrying your ground path through the entire system. If that's not installed by licensed electricians and it's done incorrectly, absolutely somebody can get hurt.
Please, Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to push back a little bit on the, so I've had situations on projects where there's been a manufacturer, and within that manufacturer, they certify their installers. And so this is specialty equipment from that specific manufacturer. In a project, it's listed to install that specific thing, or that specific manufacturer won the bid or whatever it was. So they have a certified installer that comes nationwide to install that equipment. And then, operating here in this city, I've had to have them hire a licensed whatever to sit there under an umbrella and watch them do that install because they weren't licensed in the city. So it kind of creates a little bit of a burden. Is that a problem? Or, I mean, I understand that this could be the Wild West as far as what's going on with this solar and wind stuff. But This is new, very new to the industry, very new to homes. You know, are we limiting that? And then, you know, my second question, just to throw it out there as well, is, you know, I understand that we want to protect our Wyoming businesses. And this seems like one way we're allowing that, but our Wyoming businesses can't always service the needs of the construction industry that's going on at this point in time. So it might be months before we can actually, you know, somebody can fit me into the book to come and do my install. You know, I guess that's my concerns there.
Mr. Pierce?
Chairman Yin and Representative Hornick, I don't think that we should have to worry so much about the timeline versus the safety of the installation. I still think that ultimately, if you want it done right, it still needs to be done by licensed electricians. On the certification, prime example, Ford came out with their Lightning. That Lightning truck, electric truck, can backfeed your house during an outage. In order to install that system and connect it to your house, it is required to be done by licensed electricians. We are going through the process of making sure we have our guys certified by the manufacturers to do the installation, and the installation is required to be done by a state statute of licensed electricians. So I think that the certification of a manufacturer still should not supersede the state requirements of it being a licensed electrician of doing the work. I know that, like your elevator work, that has a specific license. That is done underneath the umbrella of that manufacturer. Still, I mean, I guess those ones have their specific licensing for that application. So it's not that we are limiting the work, it's that we're requiring it to be done by properly trained licensed electricians.
Ms. Johnson, do you want to comment on that?
I do, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to just remind the committee that this doesn't change the statute at all. This makes it clearer for the public and for the profession to understand that these new innovative ways of producing and distributing electricity are also part of this, our statute. We just know it will be more helpful to municipalities, to installers, and it'll keep down those sort of rogue certified folks that are coming into our state to do this and leave. So we're just trying to, again, clean it up, make it more streamlined, and make it more helpful. So thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Representative Ward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If it doesn't change the statute, then why is it being proposed?
Ms. Johnson?
Chairman Yin, Representative Ward, thank you for the question. Again, because it makes it very clear to those who are breaking the law as it is, because of these new technologies and new advancements in electricity, that those two are included. So we're trying to protect the statute as it is and protect consumers and protect the workers who install and work on power lines. I think the most frightening thing that you heard today is that the unit that was discussed earlier, if it's not installed properly, can backfeed down the line and kill someone who's out there working on a transformer in the event of a power or a storm or a big power outage, because it was improperly installed, because a small unit was improperly installed in a home. That frightens me. I need those guys to fix the power lines when they can. I don't need them getting killed. I don't know if you know this, but Wyoming kills 4 times the number of workers, 4 times the national average is our on-the-job death rate. And this is another way to prevent us from killing more workers. I'm all for it, even if it's just being more explicit about what the statute intends.
Any other questions? We are running a little bit late, so. So thank you, Ms. Johnson, Mr. Pierce, Mr. Thompson. Are there others that want to testify on this bill? It is 10:08. We can either work the bill now or we can carry it over to the next meeting. Okay, there's a desire to work the bill now. So if there's no other public testimony, we will close public testimony and work the bill. Representative O'Hearn, did I hear that you wanted to move the bill?
Yes.
Is there a second? Second from Representative Chadwick. Is there any discussion on the bill?
And committee, I'd just say the floor has not started yet. They're having some technical difficulties, so no major rush.
Discussion on the bill. Discussion on the bill. Discussion.
Question.
Question being called on the bill. Marilyn, please take the roll. House Bill 133.
Representative Chadwick.
Aye.
Representative Clauston.
Aye.
Representative Hornick.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Penn.
Aye.
Representative Trujillo.
Aye.
Representative Ward.
No.
Representative Zwanitzer. Chairman Yin.
No.
The vote passes with 7 ayes and 2 noes.
Thank you, everybody. We worked 2 bills in 2 hours, so the meeting is adjourned, and I'll see everyone on the floor.